Alright, this video will be on subtracting decimals, and so if we were to start with a basic problem, I could think of 18.42, or 18 and 42 hundredths, and if I want to subtract 14 and 6 tenths, the most important thing is to always line up our decimal points. So in class, we named our decimal Olaf, so if we treated this like an Olaf problem, we want to line up the decimals. So I will always start with my decimal points, and then fill in everything else. So the top number will have 18 in front of the decimal and 42 behind the decimal. The second number will have 14 in front of that decimal point and a 6 behind it. My decimal points are lined up, which means every single digit is aligned by their place value. There's this missing gap right here, so we can fill all of those gaps in with zeros. Now we'll pretend like we're forgetting about the decimal point and subtract like normal. Starting in the hundredths place value, 2 minus 0 is 2. We're going to have to do a little bit of borrowing. So the 14 minus 6 becomes an 8. 7 minus 4 is 3. And 1 minus 1 is 0, so I'm not going to bother writing down the 0. However, think about money. If I use my rounding skills, if I had about $18 and I spent about $15, I'm not going to have a lot of money left in my wallet. So to have $382 left over doesn't even make sense, which means I almost forgot about my decimal point. If this was money, having $3.82 left does make sense. So let's try another problem. Oops, sorry. And let's go ahead and do one that is slightly more complicated. That usually means whole numbers. So if I start with $24 and I'm going to subtract 13 and 71 hundredths, I can again use my estimation skills to know approximately what my answer should be. So if I rounded 24 minus about 14, my answer should be somewhere close to 10. So let's see what happens. Just like the last problem, we have to line up our decimal points, but the number 24 does not have a decimal. So we learned that every single whole number has a decimal behind it. So I can make that decimal appear. Whoops, it doesn't want to work for me. And now start with those decimal points. Some students are able to write the numbers first, but I will always put the decimals because then that helps get my columns of these numbers in a nice organized fashion. Okay, so for this particular problem, maybe seeing this written vertically will help understand why it's important to fill in any gaps with zeros. So if we were to look at the top number, you can't take 1 from nothing. So that means I have to put 2 zeros behind the decimal point. Because if you were to ignore the decimal and subtract like normal, if you had 0 minus 1, you would have to borrow. So make sure you're filling in any open spaces with zeros, especially if you're working with a whole number as the original number. So here comes some borrowing practice. The 4 becomes a 3. This 0 technically first becomes a 10, but I know it's going to have to borrow again to become a 9. And in the hundredths place, the 0 becomes a 10. So 10 subtract 1 is 9. 9 minus 7 is 2 for the tenths place value. In the ones, 3 minus 3 is 0, and 2 minus 1 is 1. Don't forget about that decimal point. You drop it straight down. And that would be my final answer, 10 and 29 hundredths. If you recall at the beginning of this second problem, when I estimated my answer and said that 24 minus 14 is 10, I'd say my answer is awfully close to that, which means I did it correctly. Thanks for watching, and I hope it helped.